The night had fallen like a heavy fog over the city. Street lamps gave a weak, trembling light, and the wind moved through empty streets with a low sound. People stayed inside their homes because everyone knew the night was no longer just a night. It was the time of vampires. Aras slowly opened the door of an old church. He had a sword with silver decorations in his hand. On his belt, there were blessed daggers. Hunters like him were very few now, but Aras had a reason. 3 years ago, vampires had killed his family. The inside of the church was dark. Suddenly, he heard a cold voice behind him. "People are still trying to resist. How interesting, the vampire," said Aras turned. A tall vampire came out from the shadows. His eyes were red, and his teeth shone in the moonlight. "I am tired of killing hunters like you," the vampire said with a mocking smile. "But I never get tired of killing creatures like you." Suddenly, Aras attacked with incredible speed. At the last moment, he lifted his sword, and steel and claws collided. Sparks lit up the darkness. Aras was very strong for a normal human. He hit the vampire's shining teeth with his elbow. Aras and the vampire looked into each other's eyes for a moment. The vampire stared at Aras with a sneaky smile. Aras swung his sword again. The sword made a sharp sound in the air, but it did not hit anything. The vampire jumped to the wall at the last moment. It tried to attack again and bite Aras's throat, but Aras was ready for this attack. He took the silver dagger he had taken out earlier from his pocket and stabbed the vampire in the heart as it came toward him.
Aras checked his phone. 30 seconds later, money arrived in his account. A short message appeared on the screen. Target confirmed. Payment completed. Under the message was the seal of the council. Aras closed the phone. The vampire's dead body was completely still. After a few seconds, the body began to crack.
The skin turned gray, the veins became dark, and then the body slowly turned to ash. Aras watched quietly. He was used to this scene after so many years, but every time, the same thought appeared in his mind. Just one more, but this war will never end. Aras took a small metal capsule from his pocket. It contained blessed salt and silver powder. He scattered it over the ashes. "You will not rise again," he whispered. The inside of the church became silent again. The wind came through the broken, stained glass windows and lightly creaked the old benches. Aras was about to walk toward the door when his phone vibrated again. A new message from the council. It said, "Urgent mission." Aras frowned. The council normally did not send messages in the middle of the night, especially not right after a mission was finished. He opened the rest of the message. 17 people have disappeared in the last 24 hours. Aras's face became serious. That this was not normal. A vampire could hunt only 2 or 3 people in one night. 17. That meant a swarm. The message continued. Camera recordings detected unusual movement. Aras opened the video. It showed the entrance of an old metro station. Time 2:14 at night. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the shadows moved, and many vampires came out of the darkness. But something else caught Aras's attention. The vampires were following someone. In the last second of the video, a person appeared. A tall man. He wore a black coat. The man lifted his head toward the camera. His eyes were not red. They were completely black. Aras felt his heart stop. For a moment, Only one type of creature carried these signs. He whispered, "Impossible." The phone vibrated again. Another message from the council. Aras, a first-generation vampire, is in the city. Aras's expression hardened. First-generation vampires. They were not just vampires. They were legends. Creatures that lived for hundreds of years and were almost impossible to kill. Aras placed his sword on his back and opened the church door. The night was even darker. Street lamps were trembling. Aras began to walk, because this was no longer just a hunt. Aras was walking in a cold street when he suddenly stopped. The wind hit his face, but he could not really feel it anymore. The message on his phone was still in his mind. First-generation vampire in the city. Aras closed his eyes, and his mind took him back many years. Back then, Aras was not a hunter. He was just an ordinary person. He studied history at university, vampires, legends, old wars. These were only things in books until he met Lara. Lara worked in the university library. She had long black hair and dark eyes like the night. But what really touched Aras was the strange sadness in her eyes. The first time he saw her, he pretended to look for a book. "Excuse me," he said. "Where is the medieval myth section?" Lara looked at him. A tall, dark-haired, and handsome boy was standing in front of her with curious eyes. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then she smiled slightly. She understood why he really came. "Are you interested in vampires?" Aras was surprised. "How did you know?" Lara shrugged. "People usually go to that shelf for that reason." They talked for hours that day. Then days passed, then weeks, and Aras, without noticing, fell in love with Lara. One night, while they were walking in the city, Aras looked at her. "You know," he said, "since I met you, my life has changed. I imagine spending my whole life with you." Lara stopped. Moonlight hit her face, but her expression was strange. "Aras," she said slowly, "if one day you learn something bad about me, will you forgive me?" Aras laughed. "What could it be? Do you have a secret life?" Lara did not laugh. She only looked at him for a long time. Then she said quietly, "I wish things were that simple. That and IGHT." Aras came home one night and noticed the door was open. He thought a thief had entered the house. His heart started beating faster. "Mom?" "No answer, Dad." Silence. Aras went inside. And what he saw changed his life forever. There was blood in the middle of the living room, on the walls, on the floor. Everywhere Aras fell to his knees. His family was lying on the ground. There were bite marks on his mother's and father's necks. Their blood was completely drained. On that moment, a voice came from behind. "Sorry." Aras froze. He slowly turned. Someone was standing near the door. "Lara." Aras's heart broke. "No," he said. "No, this can't be." Lara's eyes were red. Aras stepped back. "You." A tear fell from Lara's face. "I didn't want this," Aras shouted. "Laya!" But then more vampires came out of the darkness. 5, 6, maybe more. One of them laughed. "So this boy is your toy." Lara stepped in front of the vampire. "Leave him." The vampire laughed in a mocking way. "You still care about humans." Then he looked at Aras. How sad. Suddenly, the vampire attacked Aras. Aras couldn't escape. Claws tore his chest. Aras fell to the ground. His blood flowed quickly. His eyes began to close. The last thing he saw was Lara fighting the vampires. Aras was half conscious when Lara came near him. Aras whispered, "Why? Did you trick me?" Lara was crying. "Because I wanted to protect you." Then she cut her own neck and dropped her blood onto Aras's lips. Aras's eyes grew wide. "No, don't do this." "But it was too late," Lara whispered. "Either you died, or you became like me." Aras's heart stopped. Then it started beating again. But it was different. Aras screamed. His body burned. He felt like his bones were breaking. Lara stepped back. Her eyes were full of fear. "Forgive me." But then the door broke. Council hunters came. Inside, silver arrows flew. One vampire fell, another turned to ash. Lara looked at Aras one last time, and ran away. Aras lay on the ground. Half vampire, half human, and after that night he was no longer a normal human. Aras opened his eyes. The memory disappeared. The wind still moved through the streets. Aras whispered, "Lara." He had searched for her for 7 years, his love and his betrayal. But now there was another question. Into first generation vampire really existed in the city. Could Lara have returned too? Aras tightened his sword and walked into the darkness. Because some loves. Aras was not only a hunter. He had hung his sword on the wall, and while he hunted vampires at night in the streets, he worked as a history teacher in a school during the day. When he entered the classroom, the children were noisy. Some looked at their phones, others whispered to their friends. Aras walked to the board and took the chalk. "Today, we will talk about medieval Europe." The children became a little quieter. Aras drew a big timeline on the board. The Crusades, kingdoms, diseases. "History is not only about wars," said Aras. "People's fears, beliefs, and dreams are also a part of history." Some students started taking notes. Aras's voice was calm, but the weight of years was in his eyes. A man who had fought vampires was now teaching history to children. At the end of the lesson, one student raised his hand. Young male student. His name was Burak. "Teacher," he said, in a shy voice, "there are stories in history about vampires. Could they really exist?" Some students in the class laughed. One student whispered, "What a silly question." But did not laugh. He looked at Burak. An interesting question. The boy felt embarrassed. He lowered his head. I was just curious." Aras turned to the board and gently moved the chalk. "Vampire was used in different ways in history," said Aras. "Some societies created these stories to explain diseases, fears about blood, attempts to understand the unknown." Burak lifted his head. "Teacher, do you believe in them?" The class became silent again. Aras stopped for a moment. This question might seem simple for an ordinary history teacher, but it was not simple for Aras because vampires were real. He knew that, but he could not tell the children. He smiled. "History teaches us to understand legends," he said, "whether they are real or not. What matters is why people told these stories." Burak listened carefully. "So, even if vampires didn't exist, people were afraid of them?" "Yes." Burak thought for a moment. "Maybe our fears shape us." Aras lifted his eyebrows slightly. "Good observation," he said. The boy smiled with pride. Other students in the class also started listening. Aras continued. Human history is the story of people trying to understand the unknown. Once we thought thunder was the anger of the gods. Now we understand. Electricity. Burak raised his hand again. So, vampires were also something they could not explain at one time. Aras looked at him. The question seemed simple, but it had a deep meaning. Maybe people really feared things they could not explain. Aras nodded. Maybe. Burak smiled. So everything can be learned. Aras smiled too. Yes. When the lesson ended, the students left the classroom. Aras began to erase the board, but Burak stayed at the door. Teacher, he said. Aras turned to him. Yes? Burak was a little shy. When you teach history, it becomes very interesting, said Burak. Aras smiled slightly. Thank you. Before leaving, Burak said one more thing, maybe one day you will also teach a lesson about vampires. Aras froze, but he showed nothing on his face. He only nodded. Who knows? Burak left. Aras looked at the board. History, the past, and hidden truths. He was no longer a hunter, but something inside him was still fighting. While teaching children history. Because some secrets never completely disappear. They only wait for their time. Aras finished his lesson. The students slowly left the classroom. Burak smiled one last time and joined his friends in the corridor. Aras erased the board, collected his notes, and put the history books in his bag. The day was over. He went to the corridor. The school was silent. The students' voices were already far away. Evening light came through the windows and made long shadows on the floor. Aras started walking, but something was there. A feeling. It felt like someone was watching him. He turned his head slightly. At the end of the corridor, there was no one. Only walls, cabinets, and a trembling light. You are imagining things, he whispered. He quickened his steps, but a few seconds later, he felt it again. The gaze, a hidden gaze. He turned around. Still no one. This was not normal. Aras. At school exit time, the security guard usually checked the corridor. The students had already left. The only person who should be there was Aras, but he was not alone. The shadow of the fire extinguisher on the wall stretched in a strange way. It seemed like it had moved. Aras frowned. Nonsense. He took one more step. The corridor light flickered for a moment, and at that moment, he saw movement in the shadow. Very fast. Too fast to be a human movement. Aras stopped. His heart sped up for a second. This feeling was not new. For a man who had hunted for years, this feeling was danger. He narrowed his eyes. Who is there? No answer. Only silence. Aras walked slowly. He approached the corner where the shadows were. He touched the wall. It was cold, like a normal wall. But something was missing. The shadows. It was as if they were breathing. Aras stepped back. He did not have his sword. He waited to hear a sound. Footsteps. Breath? A whisper? There was nothing. Aras shook his head. Enough. He turned. He walked toward the exit. He was only a few steps from the door. He would be free. He would go outside into the evening air, go home, maybe drink coffee. Everything was normal. But the corridor light flickered once more. And at that moment, a shadow broke away. Not from the wall, from the shadows. A human shape. Silent. Fast. Aras saw it only for a second. A figure tall. It had no face. Only darkness. Aras froze. This was not possible. His eyes must have been playing tricks on him. He quickly turned his head. The corridor was empty, but the feeling, it was still there. A stare. Watching. Someone was watching him. Aras swallowed. This could not be a coincidence. The school. His job as a history teacher. His new life, when everything was going well, was his past finding him? He slowly walked toward the door. He opened the door. The evening air hit his face. He stepped outside. The schoolyard was quiet. The sky was orange. But behind him, in the corridor, something remained. In the shadows. It was waiting. Aras did not look back. He quickened his steps. He had to go home. But there was only one question in his mind. Who was watching him? The next morning, Aras went to school as usual. As he walked through the corridor, he took a quick look at the old boards on the walls, the history projects the students had hung up, and the long shadows the light left on the floor. The school looked ordinary during the day, just like always, but deep inside he felt that something was missing. There was a strange emptiness, a feeling of unease he could not explain, as if the invisible gaze that watched him in the corridor last night was still there. He waited for the class bell, and when it rang, he entered the classroom. As the students slowly sat down, some took their notebooks out of their bags, some whispered something to their friends, and some hid their phones in their bags. But the thing that caught Aras's attention was that Burak, who usually sat at his desk first, was not there today. Burak always arrived before the lesson started, greeted his teacher with a small smile, and put his notebook on the desk to show that he was ready for the class. Aras wrote a few notes on the board and started introducing a topic about history. He asked the students some questions. Some answered, some stayed quiet, and the lesson continued. But his mind was somewhere else because Burak had not come. It looked like a simple absence, but for Aras, it meant more. The feeling of being watched in the corridor yesterday, the short movement he thought he saw in the shadows now, combined with Burak's absence, and created a picture that was hard to explain. When the lesson ended, the students left the classroom and the noise slowly faded. The corridor became quiet again. Aras erased the board, collected his notes, left a few files on the desk, and checked his phone, but there was no message from Burak. Normally, he would send a message like, "Teacher, I can't come today." At least there would be an explanation. But now the screen was empty. There were no notifications, only time passing. Aras put the phone in his pocket and thought to himself, maybe he is sick, because sometimes students suddenly get sick. Their families inform the school, and the system records it as an absence. But today, there was no explanation in the system, only a red mark. Absence. There was no other information, no reason, no explanation. This was strange, because school records usually kept everything. He went to the teacher's room and asked the other teachers, "Did Burak not come today?" Some of them looked at each other, and one of them shook his head and said, "No, there is no notification either." This answer increased the uneasiness inside Aras, because parents usually send notifications through the system and there is always an explanation, but now there was nothing. He sat at the computer and opened the student list. Burak's name was there, but next to it there was only a red mark. The explanation section was empty. Could it be a system error? Maybe there was an update, or maybe some data was missing. Aras refreshed the page and looked again, but it was still empty. This was strange because school systems usually recorded everything automatically. He stopped for a moment and took a deep breath. The hunter instinct inside him was waking up as a man who had sensed danger for many years. He could feel things he could not explain. He could recognize lies, traps, and threats. But now there was no clear enemy in front of him, only a gap, a missing piece. Burak's absence. He walked to the window and looked outside. The schoolyard was empty. The wind was moving the leaves. The sky was gray. For a very short moment, he thought he saw a figure in the distance, a human shape, but when he blinked, it was gone. Only trees and shadows remained. Aras whispered Burak, and the words seemed to stay in the air because there was no answer. No answer at all, only silence. Maybe he was really sick. Maybe he had forgotten his phone at home. Maybe his family was late to inform the school. There were logical explanations, but the feeling inside him was still there. The gaze he felt in the corridor last night, the shadow he thought he saw after school, and now Burak's absence. Was it a coincidence? Aras leaned on the desk and closed his eyes. As a teacher, he told his students about history, the lessons of the past, the mistakes of humanity, wars, and peace. But as a hunter, he also knew the truth. Sometimes things were not what they seemed. "Maybe I am thinking too much," he murmured, but his phone did not vibrate again. No message came. The school was still, quiet, and Burak was still missing. That night, after leaving school, Aras walked for a while. The evening air was cool. Street lamps gave off a weak yellow light. The sidewalks were quiet, and even the distant sound of cars was almost impossible to hear. As he walked, he kept thinking about Burak. The boy had not come to school, had not answered his messages, and there was no explanation in the system. For a teacher, this might seem normal, but inside Aras, a strange uneasiness was growing. As a man who had spent years learning to sense danger, he knew that small gaps sometimes meant something bigger. Still, he tried to calm himself by thinking, maybe he is sick, maybe his family forgot to inform the school. While walking home, he felt a little lightheaded because of the single drink he had with his friends. It helped him relax a little. He walked slowly and looked at the sky. The stars were faint because the city lights covered them. Soon he reached his apartment building. As he climbed the stairs, Burak came to his mind again. Why had the boy not come? Yesterday he seemed fine. He asked questions in class and acted normal. But today he was gone, and this absence did not feel like a normal absence to Aras. He opened the door and went inside. The lights were off, and this was strange because he thought he had left them on. Maybe he forgot, he thought. He closed the door behind him, placed the key on the table, and reached for the light switch on the wall. The light flickered, and then the room suddenly became bright. But in that light, he immediately noticed something. The table had moved. The books were scattered. They were not as neat as he had left them. This was not normal. He had left the table tidy. The objects had changed places. Aras froze for a moment. His mind started working quickly. Was someone in the house? Or had he simply forgotten? but the feeling inside him said this was not forgetfulness. The air felt different. There was a tension in the room he could not explain, as if someone had been here or was still here. Something unseen that left traces but did not show itself. "Who's there?" he said. His voice echoed through the walls of the apartment and came back to him. There was no answer. Only silence. He took one step forward. The floor creaked softly. It was a normal sound, but tonight nothing felt normal. His eyes scanned the room. The small table near the sofa had been straight before. Now it was slightly moved to the side. This small detail made him uneasy. He looked toward the kitchen. One of the cabinet doors was open. He clearly remembered that it had been closed when he left. He reached into a drawer and found a small knife. It was just a normal kitchen knife, but now it looked like a weapon, at least something he could use to defend himself. He tried to control his breathing. His heart was beating faster. For someone who had faced danger before, this feeling was not new. He took another step and entered the kitchen. At that moment, he heard a very short breathing sound behind him. It was almost like an illusion, but it was real. He quickly turned his head. No one was there. Only the door, the wall, and the shadows. But for a second, he thought he saw something. A movement. A silhouette. Too fast. Too silent for a human. He froze. Was it a shadow? Or his imagination? He blinked. There was nothing there. He thought he was standing near the door, but the shape was no longer there. The wall looked normal and the light was the same. Still, the feeling did not go away. Someone was here. Someone was watching. An unseen presence. The thought made him tense. He held the knife tighter. Who are you?" he said, but there was no answer. He took one more step and stood in the middle of the kitchen. There was no shadow. The table had only moved a little. The cabinet door was opened. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe he had forgotten to close it. He searched for logical answers, but his mind refused them. Someone had been inside. Something had been here. He breathed deeply. The light-headed feeling from the drink was gone. Old instincts returned, like a man who senses danger. He checked everything again. The windows were fine. The door was locked. No one could get in, but the objects had moved. The contradiction made him uneasy. Then his phone vibrated. A message arrived. He looked at the screen. The sender was unknown. The message was short and cold. "If you want to find Burak, stop watching." Aras froze. His heart sped up. This message. Who sent it? Burak? The council? Or the thing he thought he saw last night? He looked at the screen again. The message was still there. It was real. Someone was talking to him. Someone was watching him. Aras took a deep breath and lowered the knife. He tried to calm his mind. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe a threat. Maybe coincidence. But his hunter feeling told him it was not ordinary. He had sensed danger for years, and now that feeling was back. He looked inside the house. Silence. The shadows seemed normal. But the message, Burak, and the small changes in the house. Something was there, unseen, waiting. Aras whispered, "Who is watching me?" No answer. But the night was still there. And this night was not ordinary. The next morning, Aras went to school. He walked through the corridors and heard the noise of students and the school bell. Classes were noisy, as usual, but his mind still stayed on the strange events of the night before. He thought about the feeling of someone entering his house, the strange message on his phone, the moved table, and the short moment when he thought he saw a shadow. It no longer felt like imagination. Something had happened. He just did not understand what. He went to class and wrote notes on the board. He taught the history lesson. Students asked questions. Some answered. Some stayed quiet. But Burak was still absent. The absence, no longer felt like a normal missing day. The boy had not come for 2 days. He did not answer messages. The school system had no explanation. As a teacher, Aras did not want to interfere too much in students' lives, but the growing uneasiness would not leave him. After class, he stopped some students in the corridor and asked, calmly, "Has anyone seen Burak?" He needed information. One student shrugged. Another shook his head. No one knew anything. Then Mert spoke. "Teacher, Burak lives on GL Street. The old apartments. You know, that area." This information caught Aras's attention. He had never heard the address before. "Do you know the address?" he asked. Mert thought for a moment and then said, "Yes, teacher. GL Street." Aras wrote it down in his notebook. He memorized the address because it mattered. Burak had been absent for 2 days. A strange message had arrived at his home. There was no explanation at school. Now he had an address. This might not have seemed like normal teacher behavior, but Aras was more than a teacher. He was a man who had lived with danger. He knew that small gaps could mean big problems. He returned to his computer and opened the map. He searched for GL Street. A photo of an old apartment building appeared. The building looked worn. The walls were crumbling. The windows were dark. It seemed like no one lived there. This was strange because if a student lived there should be signs of life. Lights, objects on the balcony, movement. But the photo showed nothing. An empty building. Silent. It looked abandoned. Aras frowned. The address might be wrong. Maybe the system was old. Maybe the building had been renovated. But the feeling inside him came back. The feeling of being watched that he had felt in his house last night. The shadow he thought he saw in the corridor. The phone message. All of these seemed unrelated, but they shared something. An unexplainable presence, an invisible trace. He took his phone and wrote a message to Mert. "You said Burak's address was surely GL Street. Are you sure?" He sent it. He waited. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. No reply. This was strange. Students usually answered quickly. At least they said, "Yes, teacher." But now there was silence. A digital emptiness, just like Burak's absence. Aras lowered the phone and took a deep breath. He thought about going there after school. As a teacher, visiting a student's house was not common, but this situation was not normal. The boy had been missing for 2 days. He did not answer messages. There was a strange message at home. He had felt something in his house at night. Was this normal? Maybe he was thinking too much. Maybe there was a family problem. Maybe the boy had lost his phone. Logical explanations existed, but the hunter feeling inside him did not stop. Danger. A gap. Something missing. Burak's absence, the address GL Street. Should he go there in the evening? As a teacher? It might not be right. But as a human, he needed answers. And as a man who once hunted danger, he could not ignore the gaps. RGL Street, the strange meeting. After school, Aras went straight to RGL Street. The idea had been in his mind all day. As a teacher, visiting a student's house was unusual, but he wanted answers about the boy who had not come to school for 2 days. He did not answer his phone. There was no explanation at school. Messages remained unanswered. All of this created a gap, and Aras did not like gaps. The street was old. Buildings stood side by side. Most windows were closed. Some balconies had drying clothes. But when he approached number 12, he noticed something. The curtains were completely closed. No light came from inside. Even though it was daytime, this was not normal. In a house where someone lived, there would usually be at least a small light, some movement, a sign of life. He reached the door. He took a deep breath. He rang the bell. Silence. He waited. No sound. He rang again. Still no answer. He moved closer and listened. There was no sound from inside. This was strange. If a child had not come to school for 2 days, the family should have been contacted. There should have been an explanation. But the house was silent. Aras rang the bell again. Burak? He said. No answer. He thought for a moment. Maybe. No one was home. Maybe the family was out. But the curtains were closed. This detail stayed in his mind. He rang the bell again, this time longer. Finally, he heard a sound. From inside. Steps. Slow. Not heavy. Hesitant. The door opened. And Aras froze. Burak stood in front of him. It was the boy. The same face, the same eyes, but something was different. His gaze. It was empty. As if the person in front of him was not really there. For a moment, Aras felt relief. At least he was here. Burak, he said, why didn't you come to school? You didn't answer messages either. Burak looked at him for a long second, then he spoke slowly. I was at home. His voice was normal, but something was missing. No emotion. Aras frowned. Are you okay? Are you sick? Burak shrugged. I'm fine. The answer was short and flat. As a teacher, Aras tried to understand his students' feelings, but Burak was different now. His eyes. Empty, no trace of the cheerful boy from before. Why didn't you come to school? He asked. Again. Burak lowered his head slightly. I didn't want to. This answer was strange. A child might not like school, might be tired of lessons, but not coming for 2 days, without any explanation. Aras wanted to look inside. Are your mother or father home? Burak shook his head. No. He glanced through the door. The hallway was dark. The lights were off. The curtains were tightly closed. No light came in. This was strange. It was daytime, but even in the evening there should be some light. The closed curtains hid signs of life. Aras moved a little closer. Can I come in? Burak hesitated. His eyes moved slightly, as if he disliked the question. No need. The answer was sharp. Aras stopped. As a teacher, he did not want to force his way into a student's house, but something was wrong. A gap. Something odd. Burak's behavior was not normal. Look, he said gently. I just want to make sure you are okay. You haven't come to school for 2 days. Burak looked at him. A shadow passed through his eyes. Very quickly. But Aras noticed. I said I'm fine. His voice was colder, more distant. This no longer sounded like a sick child speaking. Something was there. Aras took a deep breath. We want you to come back to school. Burak did not reply. He just stood there. The silence grew. The house behind the door was completely dark. The curtains were closed. No sound. Aras tried to look inside. The hallway seemed empty. Were the objects in order? He couldn't tell. There was no light. Then he turned to Burak again. Are you sure you're okay? Burak nodded. Double quotes, yes. But the answer did not satisfy him. His eyes were still the same. Empty. Without emotion. Not like a child, like someone hiding something. Aras stepped back. Come to school tomorrow. Burak did not reply. He only slightly closed the door. It was a sign the conversation was over. Aras nodded. Okay. He turned. But as he walked away, the feeling inside him did not change. The house, the curtains, Burak's gaze, not coming to school, not answering messages. Something was not right. And in that house, there was a secret. Night was late and the streets were quiet. On his way home, Aras kept thinking about Burak. The boy's expression had been empty, just like the night before when Aras felt something strange at his house. Burak spoke, but it was as if he was far away. His absence from school had no explanation. He never mentioned his family. This gap worried Aras. As a man who had spent years sensing danger, he disliked things without answers. At home, he turned on the lights and checked the room. He looked at the table to see if it had moved. Last night he had felt something in the house. Objects had shifted. A message had arrived. He thought he saw a shadow, or maybe he only felt it. Either way, there was unease. He walked to an old chest. In the corner, he pulled the chest open. Inside were his old hunter tools, a small silver dagger, a blessed cross, a bottle of silver dust, and other items. He placed them in his bag. Then he went outside again. The streets were still silent. He walked toward GL Street. He hid in a shadowed place and watched the building. The curtains were still closed. No light came from inside. No sign of life. That was strange. In a house where someone lives, there should be at least a small light or movement. Minutes passed. The wind moved the leaves. Then he saw something. A shape in the shadows at the back of the building. It looked like a human silhouette, but it moved differently. It was silent. No footsteps, as if it glided instead of walking. This detail caught Aras's attention. Normal people do not move like that. The silhouette approached the door. It did not use a key. It touched the door, and it opened by itself. That was impossible. The door should have been locked. It was not the wind. The door fully opened, and the shape went inside, fast, silent, leaving no trace. Aras felt his heartbeat speed up. This was not a coincidence. Something had entered the house. He took the silver dagger from his bag and breathed deeply. He moved toward the building. The door was slightly open. A weak draft came from inside. No light. The curtains still closed. He stepped forward. The floor did not creak, which was strange, because old buildings usually make noise. But now there was only silence. His hunter instincts returned. He approached the kitchen corner. Then he heard a breath. Very faint, short. If you are not paying attention, you might miss it. He tightened his grip on the dagger and turned the corner. He saw it. A vampire dot. It stood there. Its eyes glowed. Its skin was pale. Dot. It moved quickly. Not human. Years of experience told him what he was facing. He swung the dagger. The vampire jumped back and hit the wall. It tried to attack. Again with claw-like hands. Aras dodged and struck. The dagger pierced its chest. The creature hissed and trembled. Its eyes widened. Its body cracked. The skin turned dark. Smoke rose. In seconds it became dust. Only gray powder remained on the floor. Aras breathed deeply. He thought it was over. But then he heard a sound upstairs, something falling, not heavy but clear. He looked at the stairs and went up. The corridor was dark. Burak's door was slightly open, which it had not been before. Aras approached and pushed the door. Burak lay on the bed. He did not move. His eyes were closed. His skin was pale. His lips slightly blue. This was new. Yesterday he had not looked like this. Aras reached out and touched his shoulder. Cold. Very cold. Burak? He said. No answer. The boy opened his eyes. They were empty. The same expression Aras had seen before. No emotion. Far away. Aras froze. Burak looked at him, but it was as if he could not really see him. Then he spoke, his voice weak and strange. Teacher. Aras held his breath. Burak? The boy continued. Something is happening. The words were simple, but their meaning was large. Aras frowned. What? Burak closed his eyes. His lips trembled. Then he opened them again. Aras saw it. His teeth were slightly longer. That was impossible. They had not been like that yesterday. They should not be like that now. But they were. Small, but noticeable. The change had begun. Burak lifted his hand. His nails were a little longer. Dark lines appeared under his skin, thin veins like shadows. This was not sickness. It was transformation. Aras understood. He had killed the vampire in the house, but it was too late, because Burak was changing. Slowly. Irreversibly. He felt an emptiness inside. As a hunter, he had faced danger for years. Now, he saw it again. But this time, the target was Burak. The boy opened his eyes. His gaze was still empty. Aras whispered, "Vampire."